Welcome to the 10X Blueprint Podcast, your guide to unlocking 10X growth through AI, AR, and Web3. Join Simone Knight, billion-dollar media strategist and founder of Brandiverse Marketing, for discussions with industry leaders about harnessing the power of tomorrow's technologies today. Let's step into the Brandiverse. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10X Blueprint Podcast. My name is Simone Knight, and I am your host. Today, we have a great conversation with Mr. Javonte Anyabwele, which I will be introducing here in just a second. So Javonte is the Vice President of Strategic Sourcing for Carnival Corp, and he manages over $5 billion in spend across 9 brands for Carnival. He works on the development and execution of strategic strategies within procurement. And he is a global citizen, someone fun to talk to, and a big fan of hip hop. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Mr. Javonte Anyabwele. Jay, how are you doing?
Yes, y'all. You don't stop.
Oh, man, I am thrilled to have you on the podcast today talking about the impact of emerging technologies on strategic sourcing, on travel, on consumer experiences, and really what you see happening around the world.
Yeah, it should be a fun conversation. There's a lot to talk about. I think that we have seen over the past 2 to 4 years a lot of conversation about supply chain. And I think that supply chain is a word in the lexicon for most folks that wasn't there before. So happy to have a conversation.
I know COVID kind of woke that up, right? What is supply chain services?
Made us popular. We were the boring kids in the back. But then everyone said, hey, what are they doing over there?
Now you're on and pop it. Okay. So one of the things I like to do before I really get into the interview is I like to do some fun rapid fire questions so that my audience gets a chance to get to know the guest for this week. So with that said, I know you are a big fan of hip hop. I know that we like that 80s, 90s hip hop. So I want to ask you a couple of things. Right now, there's this feud going on between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, right? And as a matter of fact, today I'm doing a post about it and releasing a little video about it. And I had a talk with a new segment called My Take, where I talk with some friends about current events and talk about my take on those things. So we were talking about the art of war with Kendrick and Drake. So what are your thoughts about this feud?
I think it's a good place to start for hip hop, having been, let's call it, a little bit atrophy in the past. Some people are listeners and lovers of hip hop. Others, like us, we actually grew up with hip hop. We grew into hip hop. We matured with hip hop. And at its core, we know that hip hop and all of the component, the art of a battle, is at the basis of it. Right? But it's hard for others to understand. The DJs started by battling each other. The breakdancers started battling each other. That's how they started. Even graffiti artists tagging was a form of battling. And so when you get to the MCs or the rappers, like, it was no different. That's where it started. The first big hit by Sugar Hill Gang, if you think about the verse, looked like a superhero flying through the air, wouldn't pay any hoes. That was all about a battle. And so hip hop has gotten away from it. Hip hop hasn't been as lively. And so I thank both of them for that. We've seen this before. Kool D and LL were the 2 largest artists at one point in time, and they battled. And then we saw Pac and Biggie, and unfortunately their untimely deaths are tied to the battle, but that wasn't it. That wasn't the cause of it as much as we know. And then also Jay-Z and Nas. So you have the 2 largest rap stars now with Drake and Kendrick, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. So hopefully it's been good for hip hop, and it ends with them coming back and going on tour or something. So I like it for hip hop. In terms of it being the art of war, if I had to say, so far, I think Kendrick has won.
I was going to say that a lot of people are saying that Kendrick is winning. And the reason why we bring it up in the context of the art of war, another colleague of mine named Orlando Hampton, he has a newsletter and he wrote the article, The Art of War, and he brought in this rap battle idea. And so I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot of strategic warfare tactics going on in here that global businesses are actually using. How he's using silences, how he's using these moments of silences between the different songs, how he's using Drake's image with the audience being a pretty boy and not being from the streets, and versus Kendrick being a lyricist. There's all of these little nuances about how you use your enemy's weaknesses against them, right? And how you win without actually fighting. And so we talk about all of that in this episode of The Art of War on the My Take version of this podcast. But in any case, since I know that you are
one more thing I would love to add here. It's hip hop is one of the things that you are always going to end up having to do is show that you are a master of your craft. And I think both of them have done it over time. But the way that Kendrick, to me, is winning now is less about the setup, which has been incredible, but also when it comes down to it, as a purist of hip hop, it's about the MC, mic controller, move the crowd. All of these are things that they say for MC. And Kendrick dropped a dance track. And at the end of the day, hip hop at its purest and most fun is when it's a dance track. And so that's where he's galvanizing. And you talk about just a broader leadership style. It's about galvanizing those who may not have been interested. Now all of a sudden you're nodding your head, and now you have chosen sides and you didn't even mean to, because there's a dance track. I want to dance to their song. They're not like us. They're not like us.
I think that that's a really important part where you talk about crowd engagement, right? Audience engagement. And that's what Kendrick is really mastering right now. And so that's how he's essentially toppling the number one, running the number one rap artist right now, is through this crowd engagement. And that's important. And he's used and leveraged his brand masterfully as a lyricist, as someone with conscious hip hop lyrics, right? And he's really taken it back to the old school. As you said, you and I, we grew up with this, right? I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Brooklyn, for sure. Literally the area of Brooklyn I'm from, people used to rap about in songs, right? This is part of my soul. And being able to dance to hip hop, being able to dance, move a party, basement parties back in Brooklyn. Some of y'all listening know what I'm talking about, right?
One time for Brooklyn.
I wanted to just ask and get your take on it, because I know you're a musical encyclopedia, and musical genres from way back, R&B, hip hop, and definitely a lot of jazz and soul music. You grew up around that. So as we talk about what old school music used to be like, what would you say is the soundtrack for your teen years growing up? What would represent Jay growing up?
Definitely a lot of Tribe Called Quest, a lot of native tongue. I was always more into fun hip hop dance. I remember when Buddy came out with Jungle Brothers. And then it ranges. I was a backpacker at once, so I was going deep. There's a lot of Wu-Tang in there. I'm absolutely a lover of words, so the lyricism of all of those. The 90s was when I was a teen, and so it used to be called Common. And when he was Common Sense, he was absolutely one of the most credible lyricists. So I used to love her, absolutely, in the old to hip hop. The Roots, before they became this sort of a worldwide phenomenon, were just this backpacking group. And so a lot of their early stuff too. But yeah, definitely the initial thought of what you said was absolutely Tribe Called Quest and Scenario and Bugging Out and all of that. So yeah, definitely.
For me, it was Tribe Called Quest Ward Tour. That is still today on my playlist. Midnight Marauders, right? Midnight Marauders. If you haven't heard it, you have to. Mos Def right in there as well. Eric B. and Rakim.
Oh yeah, I start to think and then I sink into the paper like I was 8 when I'm writing. Come on, we're going to talk about this all day if you get me started.
All right, so that's a conversation to be continued for another day. Right. Okay, so going on that, as I said, I know that you're a global citizen. You lived in many places around the world. Your work in global sourcing really has enabled that. So if you could live anywhere, where would you live in the world?
That's a good question. I've lived in and worked in Europe, in Asia. I've been to all the continents except this one here, Antarctica, behind me. I really, really love warmer places now, even though originally from Minneapolis. I love warmer places, and I love culture. I love history, music, arts, all of that. So it would be between, I think it's going to be Salvador, Brazil, could be Accra, Ghana, or it'd be New Orleans. And that's mainly because the food, along with the music, arts, and everything, and history there as well.
You know what I detected? I detected in those choices a lot of African influence. on the culture.
It's in the blood, I guess. It's in the blood. It's in the blood.
All right. We are staying authentic to the journey. All right. What are you reading right now? As you said, I know you love words. You're a writer and you read a lot. What are you reading right now, and why should I be reading it too?
I'm always usually reading 2 books. One from a personal interest is usually some type of historical book. And then there's some type of leadership or something I think will make me smarter or faster or something like that. So the first one that I am finishing up is Joy Reid's book on Medgar and Murray Evers. And I just happen to think that time period, especially for Black folk, for African Americans, it's talked about in a broad brush about civil rights. But what's not necessarily discussed, and what this book is doing a great job of, is talking about the heroism and courage and curiosity it took to fight for a shedding of second-class citizenship for a group of people who've had it for, at that time, 100 years, now 150 years. The greatest generation is often prescribed as the generation right before the Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King's. I think for Black America, that's absolutely our greatest generation. And what they had to overcome, you talk about behind enemy lines, the way that it's written, that she's writing it, it could absolutely be a spy novel. It could be somebody like an American CIA agent in Russia, because this is a Black man in Mississippi in the 1950s and 60s. It absolutely is that type of life or death situation. And to see how strong and beautiful their love was in the midst of all of that humanizes them. And it's just an aspect of vulnerability that we don't get to see with our heroes. So that's a book I'm reading now.
It sounds like a great book to potentially turn into a movie.
Another book that I'm reading is by Philip Tetlock called Super Forecasting. And so it's just about how to practice the art of looking into the future. And really, it works well for me. I'm absolutely a part-time history buff. And so one of the precepts in that book is talking about the prerequisite for having to understand the past to predict the future. But that's more of like a business leadership book that I'm reading as well. So I like that as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Because I know that you're always on personal development, personal and professional development, and I'm right there with you, right? I read a lot in terms of looking for information to elevate my thought process and how I do things relative in my personal life and my business life. It came to me, I had a theory that came to me some years ago, and I like to ask this question because it's an interesting window into people. And it's a question I call first jobs. My theory is that the first paying job that you've had really is a window into who you would become. Okay. So my question for you is, what was your first paying job?
Okay. Paying like a W-2 or just paying?
No, paying meaning like it could have been mowing lawns. It could have been babysitting, where you got money for services that were rendered and it was not your parents.
The first one, I'm going to talk about 2, but the first one was shoveling snow. I quickly realized that was too much energy for the amount of top line I was getting, because we're not talking about 3 inches of snow. We're talking about, there was a Halloween when I was still a kid in Minnesota. You can look it up. It snowed 32 inches. It sounds like, oh, we can make a lot of money. Yeah, but no, I think I shoveled 1 or 2 walkways for like a total of $20, and it took maybe the whole day. So that wasn't going to work. But what I consider my first real job, I was on a summer vacation. You go to other family. So I went to my uncle in Atlanta. He worked for Bronner Brothers, which is a beauty company based in Atlanta. And they have this amazing hair show, a world-renowned hair show, twice a year. And the one in the summer, I was allowed to sell the souvenir books. So at the time, you have a program souvenir book. They had teams of people selling these books. A lot of times, kids from the AUC, the colleges there in Atlanta, they would be the ones selling. I'm about 12 or 13, so I'm not quite college age, and they're all older. I ended up selling the second most number of books and had all types of bonuses, and ended up over a 1 or 2 day stretch making like $500. The money was definitely, I didn't even know all those bonuses were there. So there was some motivation around the fact, oh, if I sell these $5 books, I'll get $1 for each one. So I was trying to sell as many as I could. But the bigger thing is, when they said there would be a prize at the end for those who sell the most, it became a competition, which I'm probably a little bit too into. That was the thing where I got really excited about, and sold more than all the college kids as a 12-year-old, except one guy. So that was the first job.
That is pretty interesting because I know that you have a business in hair care right now. This means that my theory still holds true.
Yeah, I definitely thought about that summer and doing that with my Uncle Rod. Shout out to my Uncle Rod for exposing me to more than anything. And I think I'll mention this, take the lob here that you threw up for the alley. I am absolutely passionate about economic empowerment, and specifically for Black-owned businesses, but all minority-owned, diverse businesses. And that was my first exposure to seeing a real live Black-owned business. Brown & Brothers had been around at that point in the early 90s, had already been around for 40, 50 years. And moreover, my initial interest and why I wanted to go into business was because I saw this little movie called Boomerang. And I thought that the lead, Eddie Murphy, his character was named Marcus Graham. And he also worked in a beauty business, Black-owned business, top to bottom. And there were all of these incredibly professional, well-polished, dressed, speaking Black people living the most fabulous lives. And he had all the girls and was funny and charming.
I remember Eartha Kitt. I remember Strong J. Right.
Exactly. I
think was also in that movie.
With like Gary David, Alec Grill, Martin Lawrence, Eartha Kitt. It was top to bottom. It was amazing. That was also, I felt like I was living and seeing, and Lady Eloise off of the screen and in real life with Brun. Actually, my side hustle business is actually named Lady Eloise because of it.
Look at these influences, right? So this is where representation matters, right? It helps to build dreams for people to see what they can do. But it's not just representation from kids who are growing up in low income conditions, regardless of where they are in the world. But it's also representation in terms of being at the top, even in your companies, right? So being able to see some level of diversity with women on boards. You see these initiatives. You see, obviously, other DE&I initiatives to get more people of color in positions of power in companies across the world. And one of the things that I think recently a lot of people are focused on is diversity relative to race, but there's diversity of thought, which really is a competitive advantage. So those varying backgrounds and different levels of experience, different industries of experience are really now coming back. I was having a conversation on this podcast with Mar Hernandez. She's one of our guests coming up, and she's an executive recruiter from New Advisory Partners based here in Miami. And she was talking about what she's seeing on this in the space of executive recruitment relative to emerging technologies and the changing expectations of her clients when they're recruiting for the C-suite and EVPs and so forth, is they are looking for people that have the diversity of backgrounds to bring into those roles because it does make their company stronger. When I think about that from a perspective of in sourcing and in travel, I wonder, how do you see, for instance, sourcing and these global perspectives really driving innovation within a business?
The world that we are leaning on more is one where globalization is not a thing anymore. It's globalized. There's no more happening. It has happened. And that has been accelerated or was accelerated by technologies like the fact that you're in one place and I'm in one place and we're easily having these conversations, the way transportation is able to move, the less barriers to actually enter into other geographies. All of these things are reasons why globalization is over and globalized, and we truly live in a global world. With that, and we know that on the product side, we're getting things from all over the world. That will continue, that you're going to have to understand all different areas of the globe and the world. And that's something that's just, frankly, it's going to be part of having an ability to look at a diverse or a dynamic view of the world, because nothing looks the same as it once did. And what may be the hot spot now isn't the hot spot later. So we saw this huge surge with Taiwanese microchip companies, and that continued. And then there were supply chain issues. And then now we're seeing it heat back up in the US and other parts. We saw a lot of apparel manufacturers coming from China, and then now they're all in South America and so on and so forth. And that's on the product side. So that aspect of being diverse or having diverse thought or diverse mindset is absolutely critical to ensure that you can be a global citizen and function effectively moving forward. On the services side, as things continue to evolve and there are less touch points for, I would say, tangible items being in your own backyard, you have to understand that when you are talking on services, you are always looking to fulfill a need and do that better than what's already being done. A product can come in and it's to fulfill a need on something that hasn't been done. That's how you really disrupt with products. But on services, usually you're trying to be in a business that is already established and you have to come in and do it faster, better, cheaper. You've got to innovate on the way that it's being done. You've got to solve problems that people may or may not be asking questions about that they have, but you have a solution. The only way that you're going to be able to do that is with a diverse thought. And really, I believe that when you have the ability to not see yourself as all-knowing or the subject matter expert on everything, which usually, if you speak about diverse communities, minority communities, you grow up in a world where you're not completely consumed only by your culture and viewpoint. You develop a competitive advantage to be able to say, oh, I saw something like that over here. It wasn't in my backyard, but I had to go over there so I can bring that insight. It's no different than with your suppliers. So when you're looking at the supply base and you're looking for innovation, and a lot of the times these services make up majority of your supply base now, you have to go and find, you have an idea, but you're not going to make it. Usually you're going to buy it. And if you're buying it, you've got to be able to have a trusted partner. And that trusted partner is supposed to have insights and ideas greater than what you have yourself. And the only way that they do that is if they've been around the world. So if they've done that, and then you can glean those insights from what they have done, now you're cooking with grease. You have a diverse base of suppliers, and that's just going to breed innovation. Those insights let you take that in, and then you can, it's like getting a new spice for the first time. You put it in some food, and now you're wowing your family because they've never had that before. Didn't know they were missing it, but now they can't live without it. It's the same thing in the supply base.
Okay, I love the food and musical references in your response. So, all right, so we talked about longer globalization is globalized, and I think that's a really interesting point. And the travel industry, the tourism industry, obviously took a big blow a few years ago with the global pandemic, and the cruise ship industries, Carnival being up there number one, right, was leading the charge in terms of how do we get back out there safely and have our consumers, our guests, really focus on enjoying their vacation and their experiences and less on worry. So when it comes to that, technology allows us to be able to experience things without necessarily being someplace, or maybe there's another barrier that allows you to have more safety when space removed. How have you seen emerging technologies like augmented reality, the virtual reality, AI, and Web3 really impacting the travel industry around the world?
Yeah, so I would categorize these burgeoning type of, I won't call them completely technology. Some of the technology is older, but the uses of these technologies, this burgeoning way of using them, I would categorize it in two ways. One is what was already happening and it continues to happen. And then the other is what was accelerated by the pandemic. The pandemic had an effect on so much. And so within hospitality, some of the things that we expected before were things as simple as room service, where you're expecting a plate and they're going to display it. It's like being served restaurants in your room. That looks different now. That doesn't look the same. And I'm speaking more on the land-based side, where those room services, a lot of the times, it's not coming laid out in a platter like that. You don't know who's breathing on your food. You don't want that. You want it packaged up. And so the technology to serve that becomes different, right? you don't have the printed menus, you have digitalized process, and those menus become something that need to be updated readily. And so it allows for that. Within the broader scheme of the hospitality industry, we see the shift of generations. We see a generational shift of things that are valued more by newer generations who are new to travel, cruise, and different than before. So where in the past, maybe there wasn't such a focus on technology, or the focus was simply on a point of sale machine because you were going to sell tchotchkes and these type of things, souvenirs for a guest to take. Now a guest wants to make sure that they have the ability to be connected, to show off their vacation while they're on vacation. They want to be able to talk and show, oh, I just had this amazing experience at this culinary event. You guys have to check it out. Here's this location. So now, prior to the pandemic, especially in cruise, there was a lot of thought around, hey, everyone comes on vacation to decompress, to log off, to not be connected. But we found that during the pandemic, everyone wanted to be more connected. And that translated as well into what we're seeing in hospitality, where even on vacation, we want to be connected because I can't wait to share these great memories that I'm having. I can't wait to share these experiences. And so now we have to have incredible connectivity abilities, Wi-Fi in the middle of the ocean, where these things wouldn't have even been thought of as possible previously. Now they're must-haves for those guests to feel like their expectations are being exceeded. Those are the ways some of those technologies are different now. And then another piece of it is that how you look at it the same from some of the things that are the same. Well, you look at how you're booking, you're looking at reviews, you're looking at all of these upkeeps on a more word of mouth feel to an experience where you may not know that person who is telling you. Traditionally, word of mouth was your cousin, someone told you, oh yes, do this thing. But within hospitality, you're reviewing the boards, you're looking at, oh, what restaurant is incredible? Oh, this one has the most stars, all of that stuff. So the technologies that empower that are still there. The way they work now, newer in augmented reality, is instead of just being able to read that, and that's a Web 2 approach, where with Web, you see, okay, I can interact like this. But with Web 3, it's a consistent conversation and experience, right? So I'm able to put on, maybe I go into an augmented review of this restaurant, and I can sit there virtually and dine, and that makes me want to be there so much more. That translates into vacations or cruise ships or whatever, but we see those things starting to happen.
That's what I was going to ask, because I had a conversation with a cruise provider about these types of things, right? This type of technology allowing, for instance, high-end travel, allowing people to be able to preview their vacation or perhaps their excursions on the vacation through augmented reality, through these immersive experiences. Some of them will be more VR, virtual reality, and some of them could be augmented reality. But I realize that the cruise industry, the travel industry, is really just starting to implement these things. I'm also talking to a tourism board about creating these types of immersive experiences in their county, so that as travelers go to their county and there are these designated areas that you can use your phone and have an immersive experience and have an avatar talk to you. So now you have a much deeper experience of the history of that location. And it creates a deeper connection as well. It gives you more information to share when you're bragging to your friends or you're just talking about your vacation. And so we're embarking on this whole nother level of tourism that is much more immersive. It is technology based, and it also creates a lot more information about the traveler.
That's right. That's right.
Right? That's the other piece of it too. It's a lot more information that people will want to give up because it will allow for a more personalized experience. From a sourcing perspective, how do you see that changing things within your industry?
Data is king. We know this from where you sit, and it doesn't change on the supply side or the demand side. So you sit on the demand side or the supply side. I'm trying to find out as much as I can about not only the supply chain, but the full value chain that leads into the demand chain as well. So if I know that a guest absolutely needs to be connected, and when they are connected, they're going to be able to opt into telling all of the things that they're interested in, there's a team that's going to work on, oh, okay, well, we're going to need these things because we see there's a high interest. But if I am good at my job, I'm not going to where the ball is. I'm going to where the ball will be. And so I'm anticipating what, oh, this is going to be coming down the pike, and I'm able to see that data as well and have those same conversations within the supply chain. One of the things that I think about is if you've ever stayed at a 5-star luxury, ultra luxury hotel and you just fell in love with the bed or the shower or the smell or all of those things. So instead of, hey, using that supply base to breed in innovation and growth, is saying, okay, we've got all this data that our guests, they absolutely love this smell, this shower, this bed, this bedding. Why can't we offer that to them? We're seeing some of those things take place in our Alaskan cruises. Everyone's like, oh my God, the fish is just so much more fresh. You can taste it. It is incredible. Well, can we get that fish to you when you're not on the cruise? Absolutely. So now the supply chain has to play a role in ensuring the supplier is set up to be able to grow their business, but we grow our footprint and our touch. And every time you're eating that fish now, you can't wait to get back on the cruise.
I love that. I love that for so many reasons, because you're increasing your revenue streams. You're monetizing these experiences by extending them after the cruise. And then, of course, people are going to say, oh, I brought this fish back from Alaska, so it's treasured. And you're going to invite your friend, and then you're going to talk about your and the storytelling. I love it. I love it. Because now, from a marketing perspective, you now created more word of mouth advertising and more earned media as people post these images on their social media and tag Carnival. So I love how you're using the data that you're getting from your consumer to create additional revenue streams, expand your footprint, and also even build up local economies even more. Because as you mentioned, right, that fish supplier in Alaska is now going to be shipping that fish to Chicago or Miami, whereas they did not have that opportunity before. So you're creating these additional legacies and building up these local economies in the places where you call port. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It just happened to me. I wasn't even a guest. I was at work. I was in a destination, one of our destinations in Mexico. And it's the number one wine producing region of Mexico. And the wine was incredible, but I came across this date alcohol. They make it out of date. And it had such a unique flavor and taste. And I'm like, I got to get some of this where I am. That's just one of those type of things where now, if you're understanding that data, you're unlocking it within your supply chain, and then you're expanding your reach and your touch.
You know, as I talk to clients about implementing artificial intelligence or augmented reality, people are excited about the opportunity. They're also a little nervous about it from a governance perspective. But one of the things that I think organizations don't always understand is the importance of their data strategy when it comes to implementing these technologies. The data strategy is so key because you need to be able to take in all of the information, make sense of it, turn that data into information, into then a strategy that you can then execute. And so this is why there's a lot of conversation about your tech stack, right? So what are your cloud services? What are the different APIs that will connect to each other so that you can integrate your AI pieces across your organization and then do exactly what you're talking about, Jay, which is leverage that data to expand experiences, create more revenue streams, get a deeper footprint, and really create more fans.
Yeah, this is absolutely everything in my work. I'm dealing with those conversations. And I'm always using an analogy of if you put Michael Jordan on the Showtime Lakers when you also had Magic and Kareem, maybe that doesn't work because we've seen it. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And
is it too many stars?
Could not be too many stars, but not enough people understanding their role, or another way to say it, not a thought planful strategy around it. Then you don't get the outcomes that you're expecting. And so that's usually why it takes a long time for teams to develop into championship teams. And when they do it, it feels so special because of all of the work they had to do. And we laud and we hold up those teams who can do it over an extended period of time because it's just such a short window. So I think about where we are with AI right now, similar to where we were with internet in the 90s. It was there, but the use cases hadn't been figured out. The strategies around it hadn't been figured out. And some of these things that we're talking about doing because it's the new shiny toy, you can have a superstar player of any ilk, and maybe it doesn't fit into that team, And so we saw Joe Montana won all these championships in San Francisco, and he was still in the height of his career. He put up gaudy numbers and everything else when he went to Kansas City, but there was no ring. And so I think of it in that way. And these are conversations I'm always having with my internal customers who are the IT guys who are just very much interested in, oh, yeah, we want to go forward with this. And I'm like, well, let's work on seeing what we can do in a scrimmage in the preseason before we commit what longer term until we have a strategy figured out. Because what you can end up with is a bunch of information or a bunch of data, and it doesn't serve your purpose because there's no strategy around it. So that's key to success, is having the right strategy to fit what you're trying to accomplish versus just looking out and saying, oh, there's something new, we got to have it.
No, I hate that. I hate the new, let's check out the new shiny toy, right? Because it happens. It's been a theme occurring with corporations for a long time because everybody wants to try to get that competitive edge, right? So you don't want to be left behind with their technology, but there's a way to do it, as you mentioned, right? So if you can come up with some sort of test case, a use case, and you roll it out in a limited fashion, and you are clear about the outcomes that you're looking for from that case, then you can see, okay, you do it for a limited time, and then you do a triage. What was good? What was bad? What did we learn from here? One of the things that people shy away from is the F word, failure. People shy away from the F word of failure. But there is a way to fail that is not negative, right? Because failure is coming from an iterative process of innovation.
Absolutely.
So you can fail, but learn so much that it leads to the big innovation, the big win. And one of the things that I would do in my organization, which my teams were all about failure, you mentioned the word curiosity earlier, right? So, when one of the things that I would say to my team members when I was hiring someone new in a leadership role is that the most important thing you need to be on my team is curiosity, because I want you to ask questions. I want you to wonder why. I want you to try things that may cause some failure, but it's going to be a controlled failure that will lead to the biggest. And we were doing things with artificial intelligence back in 2017 and testing it out and iterating and learning, and got to the point where we were able to predict audience behavior. This is in media back in 2017 and 2018, when no one was talking about the shiny object yet. Now things are really moving forward and taking off. But what you're saying, Jay, is so true, that you have to have a clear strategy of why you want the data, what you're going to do with the information, and how it's going to accelerate the business.
Right. Yeah. And the idea around embracing failure to me is a life skill as well. And it's something that whether you're doing it professionally, you're trying to turn big organizations in a direction, strategy is going to be, like you mentioned, a lot of small failures that finally fall on something that's going to work. So before the light bulb took off, there were like 2,000 iterations of the idea of it. And all those others failed before that one came about. I tell my kids all the time, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Just focus on that so you're not afraid of the failure, because the rest of that is at first, because eventually you'll get better at it. But if you're not willing to try and make some of those mistakes and understand that's part of the process, then you're setting yourself up for a longer term. And so it's not a small mistake now, it's a bigger mistake because of the mindset that you had is not related to growth. And so I think about that, like you mentioned, machine learning was what AI was called back in 2017. And those were the things that were going on then. And we learned a whole lot. we learned that the data set has to be super clean. That may not be effective, and so moving past that, you got to be able to play a little bit more with, let's call it different data for the regenerative AI to then work, right? So ultimately, we're going to keep on there. They built failure into the process. Now, even within, that's the scary part of the unknown, because it'll continue to just get smarter and smarter, but that's the human brain. And so a lot of times we try to cut that off in a pursuit of trophies or the pursuit of perfection. And really it's part of the process for long-term sustainable success. And so it doesn't matter if it's technology or it's just the mindset. To me, that's a key component for life, is to build failure into that process. You've got to have those do loops and reiterate to be able to win for the long term.
I love that. Yesterday I was listening to a webinar, and it was all about these companies that are huge companies now, but talking about them as tech startups. And one of the things that one of the founders said was he would apply an 80-20 rule to the iterative process within the product development cycle. If you could solve a problem 80% of the way, then that was good. If you can come up with a solution to solve the problem 80% of the way, then that was good for you to then launch with that 80% solution. Then you would do another iteration to solve the remaining 20%. And by the time you do that 3 or 4 times, you have solved 99.9% of the problem. So it's coming up with that minimum viable product and getting out there to market with it. And you know where we've it's for decades? This is something that Microsoft used to do all the time. They would launch a new product, and then they would launch a patch, and then they would launch a patch, and then they would launch a patch. And so for them, it became a competitive advantage with speed to market.
Right. It became a whole new product stream. We can release this thing next year. It's brand new.
And when you build that into your product roadmap, you build that iterative process in. You know who does that? Apple, right? That's why there's the 13, the 15, the 17, and the I don't know whatever number we're on right now, right? Because they're not releasing everything all at once. They're releasing it in stages. Part of it is revenue strategy, but part of it is that you want to produce a product that is going to get it into the hands of your consumer, and then you can create these updates. And when you don't think about it like that, and you're too risk averse, in my opinion, you have this opportunity gap, right? Because you waited another 6 months or a year to launch that product when you could have been building revenue from that product, or you could have been gaining market share from that product, brand recognition from that product, just because you were waiting for too long. And this is something that is not only in the context of large corporations, but I would also say small businesses as well, that think it's not good enough to get it out there.
Well, it's a killer.
It's a killer. You waited too long.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to go while it's percolating. It's on your mind, because you have to create the centrifugal force around it to continue to go, okay, we're going to gain momentum the more times we go around. And you don't do that with something that's perfect, right? So because that process is never going to allow for that. So yes, absolutely. And this is something that we're trying to do within the supply base and the supply chain for sure, is bring things forward that improve incrementally a bunch of times. And then over a period of time, you have a greater improvement, and so that's key for sure. That's that Six Sigma methodology and everything. So,
right. So one of the last questions I have for you is that you've had a long career with a lot of great successes, and coming up in Minnesota, think about young Jay, right, out there riding his BMX bike, right, thinking about how he does not want to shovel snow any longer, right? Knowing what you know now about leadership, about personal growth, about the global cultural experiences that you've had, what advice would you give to young Javonte, teenage Javonte growing up in Minnesota?
You're needed in this world. You're worthy. And everything that they're saying about you is actually true. There's no reason to doubt it.
What they're saying is true. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing I would tell my teenage self is keep working out like you're still playing sports, but stop eating like you're still playing sports.
I think that's probably advice we all should take. over 40. I think we all probably need that same.
Right. But yeah, I think that there is so much self-doubt built into an experience for the typical, I'm going to say typical inner city child in the U.S. and beyond. And the cages that we put around the mind, however they got there, are complete fictitious creations, and they can be released much sooner than we end up doing. And so that's where the advice to my younger self would be is, yeah, that pretty girl, the prettiest girl likes you. Yeah, they want you for that job. You know, all of those things ended up being true. And so take advantage of that much sooner. And it's past a belief of yourself, but it's a belief of the world around you needs you, and it's a purpose. It's a purpose.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to end today's interview because you gave us a lot of great nuggets about the iterative process, about believing in yourself and knowing that your greatness is legit. It is true, right? And where the travel immersive experiences is headed and the role that data and technology play in that. So, Jay, thank you for joining me today on the 10X Blueprint podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, and I look forward to having you again in the future.
Thank you for having me. Much love and success for everything you're doing in the future.
Thank you. All right, everyone, until next week, we'll see you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us on the 10X Blueprint podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and want to stay ahead of the curve on the latest trends in AI, AR, and Web3, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at Brandiverse Marketing. Together, we'll unlock the blueprint for 10X growth. Don't miss out on our next episode, and until then, onward and upward.